The morning sun painted golden streaks across the weathered sign of Dan's Highway Diner, a humble establishment that had served truckers, travelers, and locals along Highway 16 for over 3 decades. The aroma of fresh coffee and sizzling bacon wafted through the air as early birds trickled in for their morning fix. In his usual corner booth, a man in his early 40s sat quietly, his presence both commanding and understated. Let's call him Ray. He wore a simple dark blue polo shirt and pressed khaki pants, his appearance neat despite the early hour. A wooden cane rested against his table, not a temporary aid, but a permanent companion since that fateful day in Afghanistan. Ray had his morning routine down to a science. Every Saturday, he'd arrive at 7:15 a.m. sharp, order the same breakfast, 2 eggs over medium, wheat toast, turkey bacon, and black coffee, and spend the next hour reading his tablet while enjoying the peaceful start to his weekend. The staff knew him well enough to have his coffee ready before he even sat down. "Here's your refill, hon," said Betty, the silver-haired waitress who'd been working at the diner since before Ray started coming. She moved with the efficiency of someone who'd mastered the art of diner service decades ago. "Weather's supposed to be nice today." Ray looked up from his tablet with a warm smile that lit up his entire face. "Thanks, Betty. Yeah, perfect day for the garden. Those tomato plants aren't going to stake themselves." His voice carried the kind of gentle strength that made people naturally lean in to listen. The diner buzzed with its usual morning symphony, the clink of coffee cups against saucers, the sizzle of the grill, the murmur of conversation, and the occasional burst of laughter from the counter where the local retirees gathered for their morning coffee clutch. It was comfortable, predictable, safe. Through the large windows, Ray could see trucks rumbling past on the highway, their drivers heading out for long hauls or coming in for some much-needed rest. He'd gotten to know some of the regulars over the past year, exchanging friendly nods and occasional conversations about road conditions and weather forecasts. His phone buzzed quietly on the table, a text from one of the kids he mentored at the community center. The boy had aced his math test after weeks of tutoring. Ray's face softened as he typed back a congratulatory message. These small victories made his post-military life meaningful in ways he hadn't expected. As he reached for his coffee cup, his hand briefly brushed against the cane. The touch triggered a fleeting memory of the explosion, but he pushed it aside with practiced ease. The Navy had taught him many things, but perhaps the most valuable lesson was how to stay present in the moment, how to not let the past overshadow the now. A young family walked in, their little girl clutching a stuffed unicorn. She waved at Ray as they passed his table, and he waved back, remembering similar moments with his own nieces and nephews. These simple interactions, these threads of human connection, were what he'd fought for during his years of service. The morning light grew stronger, casting long shadows across the diner's worn linoleum floor. Ray checked his watch, almost time to head out. He had a busy day ahead. A veterans support group meeting at 10, followed by afternoon gardening at the community center with the local kids. Just then, the distant rumble of motorcycles echoed from somewhere down the highway. Ray barely noticed it at first, just another sound in the morning traffic. But something about the approaching engines seemed different. Aggressive, purposeful. The peaceful Saturday morning was about to take an unexpected turn. Little did anyone in the diner know that the next few minutes would test Ray's training, patience, and humanity in ways he hadn't experienced since leaving the service. And it would all start with the roar of 3 motorcycles pulling into the parking lot, their riders carrying far more dangerous weapons than the guns Ray had faced in combat. They carried hatred and prejudice. The coffee in his cup rippled with each thunderous rev of the approaching bikes. Betty paused mid-pour at the counter, her experienced eyes catching the shift in atmosphere. Even the morning chatter dimmed slightly, like animals in the forest sensing an approaching storm. Ray took another sip of his coffee, his posture relaxed but alert. Years of training had taught him to read situations before they unfolded. But this was supposed to be just another peaceful Saturday morning at Dan's Highway Diner, right? The peaceful morning shattered as 3 motorcycles thundered into the parking lot of Dan's Highway Diner. Their engines revved unnecessarily loud, causing the window panes to rattle and coffee cups to dance in their saucers. The quiet breakfast crowd collectively tensed, like a single organism sensing danger. 3 men climbed off their bikes, each wearing leather vests decorated with patches that mark them as members of the Steel Wolves motorcycle gang. Their leader, a hulking figure with arms covered in faded tattoos, yanked off his helmet to reveal a cleanly shaved head that gleamed in the morning sun. His companions, one tall and wiry, the other stocky with a graying beard, flanked him like eager attack dogs. Betty, the veteran waitress, gripped her coffee pot tighter as she watched them through the window. She'd seen trouble walk through those doors plenty of times in her 30 years of serving, and these men had trouble written all over them. Her eyes darted to Ray's corner, worry creasing her weathered face. The bell above the door chimed, an usually cheerful sound that now felt like a warning. The bikers swaggered in, boots heavy against the linoleum floor. The diner's friendly morning chatter died away, replaced by the scraping of utensils and uncomfortable silence. Parents pulled their children closer. The retired folks at the counter suddenly found their coffee cups fascinating. Well, what do we have here?" The leader's voice carried across the diner, artificially loud and dripping with mock surprise. His eyes had locked onto Ray immediately, like a predator spotting prey. "Looks like we picked the wrong place for breakfast, boys." Ray continued reading his tablet, his movements calm and measured as he lifted his coffee cup to take another sip. His apparent disinterest seemed to irritate the bikers even more. The leader's face reddened slightly, unused to being ignored. "Hey, you hear me talking to you?" The biker took a step closer, his boots squeaking against the freshly mopped floor. His buddies spread out slightly, blocking the clear path to the door. The few customers seated between them and Ray's table quickly gathered their belongings and moved away, leaving an empty zone of tension. Betty moved toward the counter phone, but the bearded biker noticed. "Don't even think about it, Grandma," he growled. "We're just having a friendly conversation here." His tone suggested anything but friendship. Ray finally looked up, his face neutral but his eyes alert and assessing. He'd faced down worse threats in darker places than this small-town diner. "Good morning, gentlemen," he said, his voice steady and controlled. "Something I can help you with?" The leader's mouth twisted into an ugly smirk. "Oh, it speaks, and so polite too." He leaned forward, planting his hands on Ray's table. The morning light caught the tarnished rings on his fingers, brass knuckles poorly disguised as jewelry. "Actually, there is something you can help us with. See, my friends and I are trying to understand why you think you can just sit here, in our town, acting like you own the place." The other customers watched in uncomfortable silence. A young mother hurriedly paid her bill and ushered her children toward the door. The cook, a burly man named Joe, emerged from the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron, his face dark with concern. "Last I checked," Ray replied calmly, "this diner belongs to Dan, and everyone's welcome here." He maintained eye contact with the leader, neither challenging nor submitting. "Why don't you fellas grab a table? The breakfast special's pretty good today." The wiry biker let out a harsh laugh. "Listen to this guy. Trying to tell us where to eat." He kicked at Ray's cane, which had been leaning against the booth. It clattered to the floor and slid away under a nearby table. Ray's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his posture, subtle enough that most wouldn't notice, but clear as a warning bell to anyone trained to read body language. The air in the diner grew thicker with tension, like the atmosphere before a thunderstorm. "Now look what happened," the leader said with fake concern. "Better go crawl after that stick of yours." His companions snickered, but their laughter had an edge of uncertainty to it. Something about Ray's stillness was starting to make them uneasy, though they couldn't quite figure out why. The morning sun streaming through the windows cast long shadows across the scene, like nature itself was trying to illustrate the dark moment unfolding in this usually peaceful diner. The highway traffic continued to rush past outside, oblivious to the drama building inside, where one man's peaceful breakfast had turned into a powder keg waiting for a spark. What the bikers couldn't know, what they'd soon wish they'd noticed, was the way Ray's hands remained perfectly steady on the table. No tremors of fear, no nervous tapping, no signs of anxiety. Just the absolute stillness that comes from years of training in situations where the slightest movement could mean life or death. The next few moments would determine whether this situation exploded into violence or if there was still a chance for reason to prevail. and it all hinged on what these three bikers would do next, completely unaware that they'd just picked a fight with someone who'd spent years mastering the art of handling dangerous situations. Time seemed to slow down in Dan's Highway Diner as Ray's cane lay there on the floor, a few feet away under a nearby table. The morning sun caught the polished wood, making it gleam like a fallen soldier. The diner had gone so quiet you could hear the soft hum of the refrigerator behind the counter. "I'll ask you one more time," Gentleman Ray said, his voice carrying the kind of calm that comes from facing down far worse situations. "Please pick up my cane and let's all enjoy our breakfast in peace." His hands remained flat on the table, steady as rocks in a storm. The biker leader's face twisted into an ugly smile. "Or what? You're gonna hop over there and get it yourself?" His two friends chuckled, but their laughter sounded hollow, uncertain. Something about Ray's composure was starting to get under their skin. Betty, the waitress, had seen enough. Despite the earlier warning, she started moving toward the phone again. The bearded biker took a threatening step in her direction, but Ray's voice cut through the tension like a knife. "I wouldn't," he said quietly. Just 2 words, but they carried enough weight to freeze everyone in place. "The lady's not part of this." The leader leaned in closer, his breath smelling of stale cigarettes. "Look at you trying to protect everyone. Real hero, huh?" He reached out to grab Ray's collar but stopped short when he noticed something peculiar. Ray hadn't flinched, not even a blink. In that moment, the atmosphere in the diner shifted. It was subtle, like the change in air pressure before a storm, but everyone felt it. The cook behind the counter, who'd been reaching for the baseball bat he kept near the grill, slowly lowered his hand. He'd seen that look before in his brother who'd served in the military. "You know what your problem is," the leader continued, trying to maintain his aggressive stance despite his growing unease. "You think you're better than us, sitting here with your fancy tablet, drinking your fancy coffee." Ray's reply was measured, each word carefully chosen. "No, sir, I don't think I'm better than anyone. But I do believe everyone deserves respect, including you." He glanced at the leader's vest, noting a faded military patch partially covered by newer gang insignias, even those who might have forgotten what that uniform used to mean to them. The leader's face flickered with surprise, then anger. How had this stranger noticed that detail? More importantly, how had he known what it meant? The wiry biker, growing impatient with the tension, decided to escalate. He moved to knock Ray's coffee cup off the table, but his wrist never made it. Ray's hand shot up faster than anyone could follow, catching the biker's arm mid-swing. The move was so smooth, so practiced, it looked almost casual. "Son," Ray said softly, still holding the man's wrist with just enough pressure to make a point, "I really don't want to make a mess of Betty's clean floor." The diner collectively held its breath. The leader's hand twitched toward his back pocket, but he stopped when he saw Ray's eyes track the movement. Those eyes didn't miss anything, and suddenly the leader understood why. They were the eyes of someone who'd spent years watching for threats in places far more dangerous than this diner. An older man at the counter, who'd been quietly observing everything, shifted in his seat. The movement drew attention to his faded Marine Corps cap. He'd been watching Ray's movements with growing recognition, pieces of a puzzle falling into place in his mind. The tension in the diner had reached its peak. Sunlight continued to stream through the windows, creating long shadows that seemed to dance across the floor. The countdown clock on the grill timer beeped quietly, marking each second of the standoff. Ray slowly released the wiry biker's wrist, his movements deliberate and controlled. "Last chance, gentlemen. We can either talk about what's really bothering you, or we can take this somewhere else. But understand this, if we do take it outside, I won't be the one needing help getting up afterward." The words weren't delivered as a threat. If anything, they sounded like a teacher warning students about the natural consequences of poor choices. The leader's face showed the internal struggle of someone whose worldview was being challenged. His eyes darted between Ray's calm expression, the military veteran. The tension in Dan's Highway Diner had reached its breaking point. The biker leader, frustrated by Ray's unshakable calm, made his fatal mistake. He reached for Ray's shoulder, intending to pull him from the booth. What happened next would be talked about in the diner for years to come. In one fluid motion, Ray shifted his weight, redirecting the biker's momentum. The move was so smooth, so perfectly executed, that it looked like a choreographed dance. The leader stumbled backward, caught off guard by both the technique and his own force being used against him. He didn't fall. Ray had made sure of that, but his swagger vanished in an instant. "That's a SEAL takedown if I ever saw one," came a gravelly voice from the counter. The older man in the Marine Corps cap stood up slowly, coffee cup still in hand. "I'd recognize those moves anywhere. Served alongside you boys in Kandahar, 2009. The diner fell even quieter, if that was possible. The word SEAL seemed to hang in the air like smoke. The wiry biker took an involuntary step back, his face going pale. Their leader froze, his expression changing from anger to disbelief to something approaching fear. "No way," the bearded biker whispered, but his eyes told a different story. He was studying Ray's posture, the way he carried himself, the controlled precision of his movements. Everything suddenly made terrible sense. Betty, who'd known Ray for months but never knew his military background, pressed her hand to her mouth. "Is that true?" she asked softly. "You're one of them Navy SEALs?" Ray didn't answer immediately. His eyes stayed locked on the bikers, watching their body language, reading their intentions like an open book. When he finally spoke, his voice remained calm and measured. "What I am," he said quietly, "is someone who'd rather talk than fight. But make no mistake, I'm fully capable of both." The leader's hand, which had been creeping toward his back pocket again, went still. The morning sun caught the sweat now beading on his forehead. His mind was clearly racing, recalculating odds, remembering stories he'd heard about Navy SEALs and their capabilities. The old Marine at the counter chuckled softly. "You boys picked the wrong person to hassle today. I've seen what these guys can do. That little move he just showed you, that's him being nice." A truck driver eating his breakfast spoke up from his booth. "My brother served with a SEAL team," said one of them. Took down 3 armed men with just a paperclip and a coffee cup. He paused, looking at Ray's table, and he had both legs working fine. The diner's atmosphere shifted again, but this time it was different. The fear was being replaced by the atmosphere in Dan's Highway Diner transformed like a cloudy day giving way to sunshine. The biker leader stood frozen, his internal struggle visible on his face as Ray's words about the military code echoed in his mind. Without a word, he walked over to the nearby table, bent down, and picked up Ray's cane. The simple act seemed to age him 10 years, stripping away the tough guy facade to reveal something more vulnerable underneath. His hands trembled slightly as he held the cane, not from fear now, but from the weight of memories washing over him. "Afghanistan, 2007, he said quietly, still holding the cane. 82nd Airborne. His voice cracked slightly. Before everything went wrong." Ray nodded slowly, understanding filling his eyes. "Rough tour." The leader's face tightened. "Lost my best friend. Couldn't get past it when I came home." He looked down at his leather vest, at the military patch he tried to cover up but never quite could. Found these guys instead. They understood anger. Made it feel okay to be mad at the world. The diner remained silent, but it was a different kind of silence now, respectful, almost reverent. Betty wiped a tear from her cheek with the corner of her apron. The old Marine at the counter nodded slowly, understanding etched on his weathered face. "Anger's easier than pain," Ray said softly. "Hatred's easier than healing." "I get it. Spent some time in that dark place myself after this happened." He gestured to his leg. "But we're better than that. You know we are." The wiry biker shifted uncomfortably. "Boss, maybe we should." He stopped when his leader held up a hand. "No," the leader said firmly. "We're staying." "Need to hear this." He carefully handed the cane back to Ray, the gesture carrying the weight of an apology. "If you're willing to talk." Ray accepted the cane with a nod and gestured to the empty seats at his booth. "Coffee's still hot. Betty makes the best in 3 counties." Betty was already moving, coffee pot in hand, her earlier fear replaced by maternal determination. "Fresh pot coming right up, boys." She hurried to the kitchen, wiping her eyes again. The leader slid into the booth across from Ray. After a moment's hesitation, he shrugged off his leather vest, folding it so the military patch faced up. His companions exchanged glances, then retreated to a nearby table, their aggressive posturing forgotten. "Lost my team in Kandahar," the leader said quietly, staring into the empty coffee cup Betty had just placed in front of him. "Been carrying that weight ever since. Tried the VA, tried counseling, tried drinking, Nothing helped. Until I found the steel wolves. They didn't ask questions, didn't expect me to be okay. Ray leaned forward slightly. But they're not really your brothers, are they? Not like the ones you lost. The leader's hands tightened around his coffee cup. No, he whispered. They're not. The morning sun had climbed higher now, its rays highlighting the leader's face, the lines of grief, the shadows of guilt, the glimmer of something that might have been hope. The regular breakfast crowd watched in amazed silence as two former soldiers, once enemies, found common ground in their shared pain. You know, Ray said, taking a sip of his coffee, I run a veterans support group. Real informal. Just guys who've been there, talking to other guys who've been there. No pressure, no judgment. Just understanding. The cook emerged from the kitchen with 2 plates of fresh breakfast. Nobody had ordered, but he seemed to know it was needed. He set them down without a word, nodding respectfully before returning to his grill. Think a guy like me would be welcome? The leader asked, his voice barely audible. After everything. The only person judging you for your past is you, Ray replied. We've all got things we're not proud of. The question is, what are we going to do about it now? The leader's companions at the nearby table had gone quiet, listening intently. The older one absent-mindedly touched his own vest, where a similar military patch might once have been. Betty returned with the fresh coffee, pouring it with the care of someone performing a sacred ritual. The rich aroma seemed to break the tension further, bringing a sense of normalcy to this extraordinary moment. My group meets Thursdays at 7, Ray continued. Community Center on Oak Street. No uniforms, no ranks, no politics. Just veterans helping veterans find their way back. The leader looked up, meeting Ray's eyes for the first time without hostility. In that moment, something passed between them, an understanding that went beyond words, beyond their different backgrounds, beyond the events of the morning. It was the recognition of shared sacrifice, shared pain, and maybe, just maybe, shared healing. Over the next hour, Dan's Highway Diner witnessed something remarkable. The same booth that had nearly erupted in violence now hosted a conversation that touched souls. The biker leader, who'd introduced himself by his road name Tank, sat across from Ray, their coffee cups regularly refilled by a beaming Betty. Lost my lave 2 years ago, Ray explained, tapping his cane gently against the floor. IED on my last tour. Spent 6 months thinking my life was over. Couldn't see past what I'd lost. Tank nodded, understanding in his eyes. How'd you turn it around? His voice carried genuine curiosity, the angry edge from earlier completely gone. Found my purpose again, Ray said, gesturing to the diner around them. Started small. Coming here every Saturday. Getting to know people. Then one day, this kid at the community center asked me to help him with his homework. Before I knew it, I was running youth programs, veteran support groups. The old Marine from the counter had joined them, pulling up a chair at the end of the booth. He introduced himself as Pete, sharing his own stories from different wars, different decades, but the same human struggles. Hardest thing about coming home, Pete said, stirring his coffee thoughtfully, is feeling like nobody understands. Like you're speaking a different language. Tank's 2 companions, still at their nearby table, had been listening intently. The bearded one spoke up hesitantly. That why you started the Steel Wolves, boss? To find people who understood. Tank stared into his coffee cup. Thought I had. But maybe I was just finding people who were as lost as I was. He looked up at Ray. Your support group. What do you actually do there? Whatever's needed, Ray replied. Sometimes we talk about the past. Sometimes we focus on the future. Last week, we rebuilt a disabled vet's wheelchair ramp. Week before that, we helped a widow move into her new apartment. Betty appeared with fresh coffee and a plate of her homemade cinnamon rolls, refusing to accept any payment. On the house today, boys, she said firmly. It's not every day we get to see miracles in here. The morning crowd had thinned out, but those who remained watched the scene with quiet appreciation. The truck driver who'd spoken earlier about his brother was now on his phone, texting excitedly about what he'd witnessed. You know what gets me? Tank said suddenly. Coming in here, seeing you sitting alone, something just snapped. Like looking in a mirror of what could have been if I'd made different choices. He rubbed his face roughly. Man, I am so sorry. The past is just that, past, Ray replied. What matters is what we do next. Tank's companions shifted in their seats. The wiry one spoke up. "Boss, about Thursday nights. You think maybe?" "Yeah," Tank cut in, understanding the unspoken question. "Yeah, maybe it's time we all found a different kind of brotherhood." He turned back to Ray. "That offer still stand? Even for guys like us?" Ray's smile was warm and genuine. "Doors always open. No judgment, remember? Just veterans helping veterans." The cook appeared from the kitchen, wiping his hands on his apron. "Guys, hate to break this up, but lunch crowd's gonna be here soon." Tank looked at his watch, surprised by how much time had passed. He reached for his wallet, but Ray waved him off. "I got this one. You can get the next one on Thursday." As they stood up, Tank hesitated, then stuck out his hand. "Thank you. Not just for breakfast, but for—" he struggled to find the words. "For seeing past the anger to the soldier underneath?" Ray suggested quietly, accepting the handshake. Tank nodded, emotion making his voice rough. "Been a long time since anyone looked at me and saw anything worth saving." The morning sun had shifted, casting different shadows now. Betty bustled around, clearing tables and wiping away old traces of the earlier confrontation. But something had changed in the diner, something permanent and profound. As Tank and his companions headed for the door, Tank paused. He turned back to Ray, who was gathering his tablet and cane. "Hey, one thing's been bugging me. When we first came in, acting like idiots, you could have taken us all down in seconds. Why didn't you?" Ray's answer was simple but powerful. "Because sometimes the strongest thing you can do is show mercy. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is give someone a chance to remember who they really are." The words hung in the air as the bikers left, the rumble of their motorcycles somehow softer, less aggressive than when they'd arrived. Pete, the old Marine, clapped Ray on the shoulder. "You done good, son. You done real good." Betty watched through the window as the bikers rode away. "You think they'll really come? Thursday night?" Ray smiled, adjusting his cane. "They'll come. Sometimes people just need a bridge back to who they used to be. Today, we built that bridge." 1 month later, the community center on Oak Street buzzed with activity. The evening sun slanted through the windows, casting long shadows across the meeting room where Ray's veteran support group had just wrapped up another Thursday session. But tonight was special. Tonight marked Tank's 1-month anniversary with the group. "Can't believe it's only been 4 weeks," Tank said, helping to stack chairs against the wall. He'd traded his leather vest for a simple blue work shirt, though he'd kept his military patch, now proudly displayed on a chain around his neck. "Feels like I've known you guys forever." The room looked different from a month ago. New faces had joined their circle, including Tank's former biker companions and several other veterans who'd heard about the group through the grapevine. The story of what happened at Dan's Highway Diner had spread through the veteran community like wildfire, drawing in others who'd been seeking their own way back from the darkness. "Remember what you told us earlier?" Ray asked, leaning on his cane as he gathered some papers from the folding table. "About your first impression when you saw me at the diner? Think you could share that with the new guys next week?" Tank paused in his chair stacking. "You sure? It's not exactly my proudest moment." "That's exactly why it matters," Ray replied. "Shows how far a person can come when they're ready to change." The community center's janitor poked his head in, then smiled and backed out quietly. He'd learned to give these men their space after meetings. Sometimes the most important conversations happened in these informal moments after the official session ended. "Got something to tell you all," Tank said, addressing the small group that remained behind to help clean up. "Turned in my Steel Wolves vest yesterday. For good." A ripple of supportive murmurs went through the room. Pete, the old Marine who'd become a regular after that date in the diner, clapped Tank on the shoulder. "Proud of you, son." "Wasn't just the vest," Tank continued, his voice thick with emotion. "Called my sister for the first time in 5 years. She cried. I cried. Gonna see my nephew this weekend. He's 7 now. Can you believe that? Haven't seen him since he was 2. Ray smiled, remembering his own journey back from the edge. Family's a powerful healing force when we let it be. The evening light had turned golden, filling the room with a warm glow. Through the windows, they could see young kids playing basketball on the community center's court, some of the same kids Ray mentored in his youth program. "You know what's funny?" Tank said, watching the kids play. "My nephew, he's crazy about superheroes. always talking about Captain America and all that. But real heroes? He looked around the room at his fellow veterans. Real heroes are right here, not wearing capes or masks, just showing up day after day, helping each other find their way back. One of Tank's former biker buddies, the one with the gray beard, spoke up from where he was sweeping the floor. "Remember what you used to say, boss? About how anger made you feel strong?" Tank nodded, a sad smile crossing his face. "Yeah, but I was wrong. This," he gestured to the room, to the men who'd become his new brothers, "this is real strength, facing your demons. Admitting when you're wrong. Helping others even when you're still healing yourself." Ray checked his watch. Almost time to lock up. "But before we go, Tank, you still good to help with that wheelchair ramp project on Saturday?" "Wouldn't miss it," Tank replied. "Got my old construction tools out of storage. Remember what you said about finding Peppers? Think I finally found mine." As they finished cleaning up, a young boy stuck his head in the door. "Mr. Ray, can you help us with our basketball game? We need a referee." Ray grinned. "Be right there, buddy." He turned to the others. "Anyone want to help coach some future All-Stars?" The response was immediate. Tank and several others volunteered. Soon they were all heading outside, their shadows stretching long in the evening sun. The sound of children's laughter mixed with the deep chuckles of men who'd rediscovered how to smile. Just before they reached the court, Tank caught Ray's arm. "Hey, that day in the diner. You could have just knocked us down, shown us how tough you were. But you did something harder. You showed us how to stand back up." Ray's eyes crinkled with understanding. Sometimes the toughest battles aren't fought with fists. Sometimes they're fought with forgiveness, patience, and a willingness to see the good in people, even when they can't see it in themselves. As they stepped onto the basketball court, the setting sun painted the sky in brilliant colors. The kids immediately surrounded them, eager to start their game. Tank, who once struck fear into people's hearts, now lifted a small boy onto his shoulders to help him make a basket. Betty, who'd stopped by to bring snacks for the kids, watched from the sidelines. "Would you look at that?" she said softly to Ray. "A month ago, I was ready to call the police on those boys. Now look at them." Ray nodded, smiling as he watched Tank teaching a young girl how to dribble. "That's the thing about bridges," he said. "Once they're built, you never know how many lives they'll change." The basketball game continued into the early evening, filled with laughter, encouragement, and the joy of simple human connection. It was more than just a game. It was a testament to the power of second chances, the strength of forgiveness, and the endless possibilities that open up when people choose to see the best in each other. As they stepped onto the basketball court, the setting sun painted the sky in brilliant colors. The kids immediately surrounded them, eager to start their game. Tank, who once struck fear into people's hearts, now lifted a small boy onto his shoulders to help him make a basket. Betty, who'd stopped by to bring snacks for the kids, watched from the sidelines. "Would you look at that?" she said softly to Ray. "A month ago, I was ready to call the police on those boys. Now look at them." Ray nodded, smiling as he watched Tank teaching a young girl how to dribble. "That's the thing about bridges," he said. "Once they're built, you never know how many lives they'll change." The basketball game continued into the early evening, filled with laughter, encouragement, and the joy of simple human connection. It was more than just a game. It was a testament to the power of second chances, the strength of forgiveness, and the endless possibilities that open up when people choose to see the best in each other.